Mr. President, as I'm sure you saw in the coffee break, we are very honored to have not only you here, but to have a distinguished group of visitors today. We have Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, Commander U.S. Army Europe. Of course, your Minister of Defense and Chief of Defense are here. We have the Lithuanian Foreign Minister, Linas Linkevičius, coming later. Deputy Foreign Minister of Latvia, and a close friend, Andrejs Pilagovic, is here. We have a number of former ministers from different countries in Europe. I see a number of former colleagues of mine from the NATO North Atlantic Council. All of us visited Georgia in 2008, shortly after the invasion. We have a number of people who have worked hard at building democracy and civil society in a variety of different countries. I can't possibly name them all. We have a former EU Commissioner, Stefan Füle, Commissioner for Enlargement, Giorgi Schneider, who is here, who has worked on civil society in the Czech Republic, Pavel Demeš in Slovakia, and on and on. There's a tremendous array of people, and we're all here to express our support and aspirations for Georgia. But I wanted to start off first by asking you, describe in your own words where you see Georgia in its journey towards Europe. How far have you come? Where do you want to be? What needs to happen?
First of all, how far have we gone? I think that we have gone pretty far, and taking into consideration the environment that we are developing our society and our country, I think we have done a tremendous job. Basically, if you look into democracy textbooks, you find there that a country whose territories are occupied or the borders are violated, a country that doesn't have a strong economy, that doesn't have a possibility, that doesn't have yet developed a firm middle class, doesn't have a great chance to develop a sustainable democracy. But when you look at Georgia, you see that all those cliches have been overcome, and they have been basically overcome by the commitments and strength of our society and our commitments to the values that we all share, and the commitment of political class to hold to and stick to those principles. And when you see a country that has been under severe pressure for the last 24 years, and we are talking about an occupation of 2008, but really occupation did happen much earlier. It happened in the 90s, and the hybrid war that we are now witnessing in eastern Ukraine with those green men as militaries that are not militaries that do not act as a regular army, but are part of the regular army and are fighting together with sort of local militia and stuff like that. We've seen that in the 90s in Georgia, and really the occupation of Abkhazia, the occupation of Tbilisi Valley region started in the 90s and started with this kind of warfare in Georgia, where we had Russian militaries being present in this kind of form in which we see them right now in Ukraine, and this was 90s. And starting from 90s, we witnessed in one or another form a severe pressure on Georgia's economic capacities. Of course, we saw engagement in one or another form in Georgian politics, and still our society has been faithful to some of the main principles, and politicians in Georgia were faithful more or less to these intentions and emotions that are in my culture, in my society, and were able to build a democracy with an impressively free media, if you look at the region and if you look at the environment, with a viable and active political process, with political parties that are in opposition or are in government that compete with each other and confront each other and discuss issues openly in media environment, with an impressive elections in 2012, when the government has been changed through an electoral process, and with other developments that we see here, the strengthening of institutions, fight against corruption, and all this is happening in a country that has 300,000 locally displaced refugees, which are a burden for economic process, of course, and which are part of our social responsibility. So an economy that has been hit strongly by the destruction of the ties in the beginning of the collapse of Soviet Union, and all this happening in this society that has lots of challenges, with Russian occupation forces just being 40 kilometers from the location that we are sitting right now. And still this society is able to develop and to further democratic process, to strengthen the state, to strengthen institutions, to strengthen not only state institutions, but also non-state actors like media, like civil society. And this is happening in a pretty hot environment. A country that's also able in this process to become a part of a global geopolitical process, a country that is bringing together major projects like energy transportation projects, major commodity transportation projects from east to west. So if I look at what we have or where we are, I can only applaud to our society, to our political players in the country, and to the effort that we have done.
So looking ahead then, you mentioned, for instance, the electoral climate and the successful change of power in 2012, a peaceful electoral change of power, which is quite an accomplishment in this part of the world. You mentioned the media environment. Looking ahead, what do you see needs to be done? How do you see that environment going into parliamentary elections next year? How do you see the media climate looking ahead?
Well, I think what has to be done, I mean, there are quite the challenges. At any democracy is faced with challenges. If you don't fight for furthering your democratic environment, if you constantly don't fight for a better electoral process, if you don't fight for the freedom of media, if you don't fight for stronger civil society, then democracy will decline, and you never achieve the final goal. It's a process. So we are still in the process, and we still have challenges in the process. And I believe those challenges will be overcome during this year for the upcoming one of the most important elections in this electoral cycle, which will be the parliamentary elections of the next parliament in 2016. And it is important to keep peace and stability and social consensus on the main rules of the game, and keeping this peace and stability and showing the positive dynamics on our European and Euro-Atlantic path is something that we have to achieve. So if I'm looking at the short-term goals for the next 1 year, I would say that it is important and crucial to be very cautious about ongoing provocations from the Russian Federation, which we witness basically daily in one or another format, be it capturing of people on the borderization line and being transfer and movement of the borderization, this artificial line, other issues that we are witnessing with our northern neighbor. To be very calm, to be very cautious, to be very tentative on this issue, and not fall into this trap of those provocations. This is one of the very important things. The second thing is to improve our electoral environment, to improve the environment that we have on the election legislation, and this is one of the important standing issues in our political debates because we are entitled to make further improvements in this respect. It is absolutely crucial to keep media as free, but even more engaged media in covering and in discussing and in being in a political process. It is extremely important for us to overcome economic constraints that are part of a global economic process in the region, and they are definitely negative and are influencing Georgia in a negative way. And it's I'm terribly sorry about that because we had a great start with the signature of the association agreement and with the DCFTA. It was a great potential that Georgia could use and a great momentum for our development, but it has been sort of undermined by that process. And plus it is very important to keep Georgian society united and sure in one of the most principal and fundamental democratic beliefs that this political process is driven by a voter, and that the voter, the individual voter, is the one who really, that he or she decides who will be in the government. And this is a very important thing that has happened in the minds of Georgian politicians and Georgian voters, because since 2012, everyone believes that their voice counts. This is a firm belief. Whether those are people in the government or people in opposition, they do believe that the individual voters' cast vote counts, and it really decides who is going to take the seat in the government. So we have to keep that very important principle alive, and it would be a very wrong thing to do to undermine that. And plus, we have to conduct even better, free and fair elections.
You mentioned the confidence that voters have in the political institutions and the political process, which is critical. What about the confidence that voters have in Georgia's Euro-Atlantic orientation? Do you see any changes? Is Georgia as committed to Europe and NATO as in the past? Is there a pull towards Russia in some way? How do you see public opinion on that?
Well, we have witnessed, with the recent polls, we have witnessed sort of more, I will not call them reluctant, but the group that is questioning this orientation, and it has been estimated to a number of up to 30%. I would say that this is a part of society that has always been in Georgia, and it's normal. I think that the freedom and more freedom and more democracy have brought these voices out, and we are now hearing them, whereas before they were much more afraid, let's say, to express themselves. So I think that this is normal. I think that this is a part of democracy. I think that those skepticists will find their seats in the parliament. But I think that this is not a tragedy, because this is part of democracy. It's part of the pluralism that can be in society. I think that unfortunately some of our Western allies' comments on political developments in the region, in Georgia, about Europe's security, which I was mentioning in my opening speech, they are contributing to increasing number of skeptics, because some of the comments are let's say they are not contributing to a more clear vision about future of the countries of Eastern Partnership. So that is the environment. But if we look at Georgian political spectrum, we see a very strong and dedicated pro-Western parties which confront with each other, but are still dedicated and committed to liberal values, to democracy, to development of democracy, to too pro-Western vision. This is a biggest bulk and intellectual chunk of the political process here. So I believe it will prevail, but we'll have a portion of a different opinion still in the new parliament.
So, to be clear, you see the main political parties and the government as clearly committed to this Euro-Atlantic vision.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I see possibilities for the skeptics. And once more, even those parties which are not looking clearly pro-EU, pro-NATO, they don't express themselves clearly anti-EU or NATO. What their position is, which is very consistent with the position of Moscow, with the ideological pressure that we all witnessed, and much more sophisticated ideological pressure from Moscow, which is basically talking about the reality on the ground. They're not saying that this the customs union is better or union with Russia is better. What they are saying is that this is the state on the ground, and please be realistic. EU is unachievable, NATO is unachievable. The realistic choice is here with Russia and with the future of being part of Russian orbit. So this is not a stupidly built campaign. This is much more sophisticated than it has been before. And I believe that all of the politicians that think that and believe that Georgia's natural choice and Georgia's natural habitat is Euro and Euro-Atlantic have to be more consolidated on confronting those issues. They are not stupid anymore.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as the future of the relationship with Russia? You mentioned the more sophisticated messaging. You mentioned they're still occupying Georgian territory. We see what is happening in Ukraine with Georgian forces there. They annexed Crimea. They've recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states, including signing treaties that bring Russian border guards right up to the borders here. They've moved the borders. How do you see this looking down the road a few years? What's going to happen?
Well, it's a multi-component track and a multi-component question. First of all, what I don't see is a consistent answer from our Western allies or from the Western world as in general on those policies of Russia. I don't see a clear vision about Europe's security and stability. I don't see the acknowledgement of the fact that the equation of European security cannot be discussed without discussing Eastern Partnership countries. And any discussion about Europe's security not including Eastern Partnership countries, I believe, is a fake attempt to run away from reality. So that's what I don't see. I'm being very frank, I don't see active US policy in Europe and in engaging on those issues. What I see in all this respect and criticizing everyone around, I can say that our policy is the right policy in this context, because what we do in this time being, not having a clear vision from our allies, is that we stick to our national interests and our national needs. We all the time talk very openly about Georgia's national interests, about violation of those national interests through violation of international law. We talk about Georgia's role as a stabilizing factor in the Caucasus, as a country that is bringing opportunities not only for itself, but it is bringing opportunities to countries in East and countries in West, and not only opportunities but solutions as well. We are talking about Georgia seen from north and talking how attractive Georgia is from north, and how many issues could be decided if Georgia was not so active. We are talking about opportunities that Georgia is creating and opening, not only economic, but also choice opportunities for countries of the Caspian Sea basin. We are talking about the role that Georgia is playing in a new reality in the Black Sea basin and the role of the Black Sea. At the same time, we try to be very cautious with Russia and not confront Russia directly. So this is our policy in the time being, and I believe in these vague times when we don't have a clear vision what we are doing really doing the right thing, and we are keeping this track very sustainable, and we are pushing on our agenda in EU and in NATO, and doing this in a very I believe, a systematic way.
Yeah. Thank you. As president, you obviously get the opportunity to meet with European leaders quite a lot. What do they say when you present this vision to them of Georgia oriented towards the west, building bridges toward the east, cautious with Russia, all the problems that you have with Russia, and not enough vision coming out of Europe or the United States? What kind of reaction do you get? What do you hear?
Well, I think that it's most comfortable to talk from the perspective of European leader, because when you talk tete-a-tete, each and every one of them agrees with you. They have an empathy with your problems. They agree with your vision, but it's always great to say there's another man somewhere there who is skeptic, and you have a great chance you're one of 27 or one of, and this makes this dialogue very comfortable for me as well, because I never got confronted on those issues. I have total sharing, but we are always talking about someone there, a fanatical, which is not completely on the page.
Okay. One of the things that we see is a somewhat different approach, just in what you described, to dealing with Ukraine from the European Union and the United States. So the US and EU have implemented sanctions against Russia, are very actively in support of Ukraine. You've mentioned trying to avoid the confrontation with Russia. What's your own perspective on what's happening inside Ukraine and the right way for us to deal with Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine is going through a very complicated process simultaneously. Strong national building process on one hand, a terrible and bloody process of fighting with one of the world's nuclear superpowers in arms, fighting with them. On the other hand, I think what Ukraine needs is a constant support, and constant support that should be rendered to Ukraine not only in confronting Russia, but in engaging in solving the Ukrainian issues and helping Ukrainians solve their issues, helping Ukrainian leadership to be committed how they are on the track of building the state and protecting the state. And in this respect, I think that Ukraine, there are many things going in Ukraine. On one hand, they have a war with Russia, which, as I told you, we have done 20 years ago. On the other hand, they are reforming their army, which we have done some 10 years ago. So, and they are doing this at once in one time and in one coincidence. And so I think what we have to do is when you have your friends fighting, and when you have your friends in a warfare, you don't discuss sort of small details and nuts and bolts, but you help them and you commit yourself to their cause, and then those nuts and bolts and small details will be discussed later. So I think what we all have to do right now is to help Ukraine on the Russian front and on Ukrainian front at the same time.
I want to ask our organizers here, do we have a roving microphone for members of the audience? We do? Okay, if we can get that ready. And I'm going to ask one more question back to domestic politics as we let the audience gather their thoughts. One of the things I'm very pleased with in this conference, in addition to the participation of you, Mr. President, and the Prime Minister, so we really have the Georgian government and Defense Minister at the highest levels, is the presence also of former members of the government and members of the previous government as well. So we have what I would say is the prospects of the government and opposition uniting around some shared goals about Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration. And I think that is very, very promising. And I think if I reflect on what I hear when I travel in Europe or the United States, that's one of the concerns that people raise, is the degree of division in politics in Georgia. Yet I think we also see some glimmers of hope here. And I wanted to ask you, as the president, you're not a part of the government, you're in a different kind of capacity as the elected president of Georgia. How do you view the future of relations between government and opposition in Georgia?
Well, I think that it is crucial for our democracy that the future elections bring a further stability, democratic stability for our country. And one of the crucial components in building a more stable democracy is to building more stable political parties. And by saying more, I mean something more than two. There should be more than 2, 3, 4, maybe even more political parties that are strong enough to get into this parliament, but not only into this parliament, and to get into the other parliaments with probably different proportions, probably forming coalitions in the parliament. But it is crucial to run away from a bipolar matrix which has been so systemic in Georgia, and this bipolar system is naturally, by its essence, creating a harder confrontation, a harder tension, and a vision that one who has to win and the winner takes all. So I believe that a very intensive party building process, which will be intensified through this 1 year of electoral cycle, will bring much more players into more systemic and stronger players into political scene, and there we'll see a natural decrease of tension by the mere fact that there will be more players, and demonizing of each other will naturally disappear, because it's easy to demonize an opponent when there's one opponent out there and you have to win. But when there are 3 or 4 players, it makes a much more stable environment. So I believe that this is an ultimate goal for furthering our democracy for the upcoming years.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. If we can turn to a member of the audience, do we have any questions for the President? Please raise a hand if you do. In the very back right, I see a hand. If someone would bring a microphone back there, please.
Hello, I'm David Pardo from Liberal Magazine. I have a question to Mr. President. Do you hear me well? Oh, okay. So after what we saw, the activities of Russia in the Ukraine, we saw how Europe reacted to the conflict by imposing sanctions, but we didn't see the same happening in Georgia. I mean, I want to ask Mr. President, when he meets with the leaders of the Europe, does he feel that Europe is any less supportive to Georgia by not imposing sanctions to what happens in Georgia? I mean, the violence when something happened, when the violence was happening in the Ukraine.
Thank you. And because of the sound quality, let me repeat the question. The European Union has imposed sanctions on Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. It did not do so after the invasion of Georgia in 2008. When you meet with European leaders today, how do they account for the difference?
First of all, not all European leaders that were in 2008 are still in power in 2014. So you don't have to question each and all of them for their behavior in 2008. But really, what we discuss is not what happened in 2008. We discuss future, and in discussing this future. And first of all, in 2008, let me note that we had a very active engagement of EU that basically stopped the bloodshed in hours or days. So we are not discussing how they behaved or how Europe behaved in 2008. We discuss what we have done starting from 2008 together so that 2014 in Ukraine would not happen. And in this respect, we all agree that our homework was not done effectively because Russia was very active, decisive, and engaged very fast in 2014 in Ukraine. But even more, we discuss future, what has to be done. And when talking about Georgia and talking about Ukraine, and now we see that this is a trend and not a separate case that happened in 2008 and separate case that happened in 2014, but it's a trend and an explication of Russian foreign policy, of looking at Georgia or Ukraine or any other neighbor as its backyard. And we are talking about a systemic policy confronting this global political view that Russia has. And that's what I was trying to share with you, is that still we don't have a clear answer. We have a much more clearer vision from Moscow, the ones that we might not like, but that is spelled out, spoken, and even executed. And what do we do, on the other hand? How do we confront this vision? We have our own position on that issues, and we say we have to further integration of Georgia, of Ukraine, of other countries that have made their choice pro-Europe, pro-NATO, and by furthering this integration of countries like this, we are solving the issue. We are not creating the problem. Our argument is that we are creating problem by creating ambiguities in this respect, by not giving clear answers whether Georgia has the right or not to become part of Europe, by not giving a clear answer that Georgia's sovereign decision of becoming a member of North Atlantic Treaty Organization could only be decided by the member states of NATO and no one else, and no other third party. By not giving those clear answers, we shouldn't think that we are solving a problem or even postponing the problem. We are, by those ambiguities, we are tempting politicians for being even more active on the privileged interest zone policy. So this is what we say.
That's terrific. Thank you. We have time for one more question, although I'm tempted to end on such a good note. But Stefano Stefanini, former advisor to the President of Italy and former ambassador of Italy to NATO.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I'll repeat the question. Just go ahead, Stefano.
You compare the situation with 2008. You compare the situation today with 2008. From Georgia point of view, do you feel you're better equipped to deal with the challenge for Russia, with the vision that you now see more clearly from Russia, or as Georgia, in spite of the occupied territories,
So the question, again, to repeat for the audience, is compared to 2008, do you feel that Georgia is in a better position today to manage challenges with Russia, which are there, or do you feel that it is still a very difficult struggle?
It is a difficult struggle, but definitely we are better equipped. Simply, we are always paying very high price for this better knowledge, for this better understanding and being more prepared. Of course, we are, and let me tell you why. First of all, we increased and are constantly increasing our defensibility, and our militaries and our army and our servicemen are much more better equipped. They have higher experience. They are now we are one of the most compatible non-NATO countries with the NATO alliance in the military context. The other is political experience. We are politically also much more mature and do understand how those provocations happen and how you are going to act in these cases and how you are going to build on your strengths and weaknesses in this kind of cases. We are also better equipped by society's very hard but valuable experience. We know that on some issues we have to be much more cautious and to be much more mature and be maybe even less emotional, less Georgians than we have to be. We can be more Georgians in internal politics, be a little bit more less emotional on the foreign policy. We are better equipped, but this better knowledge and better equipment comes always very hard with the lives of your men and women who die in those aggressive acts.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the President of Georgia, Giorgi Margvelashvili. And I'd like to invite Lieutenant General Hodges to come to the stage. We'll continue right on.